He became one of Hollywood's most unforgettable faces. The terrifying Penguin in Batman Returns, the ruthless Louis De Palma in Taxi, the chaotic Frank Reynolds in It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. But behind the laughter, behind the strange characters, and behind that fearless screen presence, Danny DeVito was carrying a story very few people truly understood. A story about rejection, pain, survival, and one woman who saw him before the world ever did. And before we continue, if you love emotional stories about legends, fame, sacrifice, and the human side behind Hollywood, make sure to subscribe. Because Danny DeVito's life is not just a story about success. It is a story about being told you are not enough and proving the world wrong without changing who you are. Danny DeVito was born on November 17, 1944, in Neptune, New Jersey. He did not arrive in the world looking like the kind of man Hollywood usually builds dreams around. He was short, intense, different, and impossible to ignore. As he grew older, his height became one of the first things people noticed, but it was never the whole story. DeVito has been widely reported to have multiple epiphyseal dysplasia, also known as Fairbanks disease, a rare bone condition that affected his growth. But what many people saw as a limitation, Danny would eventually turn into part of his identity. But this was only the beginning. Growing up in New Jersey, Danny was not surrounded by glamour. His father was a small businessman, his mother kept the home together, and the world around him was working class, tough, and direct. There was no easy road laid out for him, no powerful family connection that guaranteed him a place in Hollywood, no perfect leading man image that made casting directors run toward him. If Danny wanted to be seen, he would have to force the world to look. And this is where the real battle started. From a young age, Danny understood what it felt like to be underestimated before he even opened his mouth. People made assumptions about him. They saw his size before they saw his mind. They saw his appearance before they saw his talent. But inside that small frame was something much bigger than anyone expected. Timing, intelligence, rage, humor, and a strange kind of confidence that could fill a room. He did not need to look like everyone else. He needed to make people remember him. But Hollywood does not easily reward people who refuse to fit the frame. Before the fame, Danny worked his way through the acting world with the kind of patience that breaks many people. He trained, auditioned, waited, and faced rejection again and again. In New York, he was part of a generation of actors trying to survive on very little money and a lot of belief. Some people around him began getting noticed. Some started getting roles. But Danny's path moved slower. Casting directors did not always know where to place him. Studios wanted familiar faces, familiar bodies, familiar types. Danny was not familiar. He was something else. And sometimes, being different is only powerful after the world finally catches up. For years, Danny fought for every inch of space he got. He was not treated like an obvious star. He was not the actor people imagined on posters. But every time he walked into a room, he brought something no one else could copy. He had danger and comedy in the same breath. He could make people laugh, then make them uncomfortable, then make them feel sorry for a character they thought they hated. That rare mix would become his weapon. But before Hollywood truly understood him, someone else saw him first. In 1971, Rhea Perlman went to see a small stage performance in New York. She had not gone there to discover the love of her life. She had gone to watch someone else. But then, Danny DeVito appeared on stage, and something changed. He was not tall. He was not polished in the traditional Hollywood way. But he had control. He had energy. He had presence. According to the story Rhea has told over the years, she wanted to meet him immediately. What happened next would shape the rest of both their lives. Danny and Rhea connected quickly, almost unbelievably quickly. Within weeks, they were living together. To outsiders, it may have looked impulsive. But for two young actors trying to survive in New York, it may have felt like recognition. Not romance in the shallow Hollywood sense, but recognition the kind where one person looks at another and sees something the world has not yet valued. Rhea saw Danny before the awards, before the films, before the iconic roles. She saw him when belief was still more important than proof. And sometimes, that is the person who matters most. For years, they built a life before the world truly knew their names. They were not yet the famous couple people would later admire. They were two working actors chasing roles, dealing with uncertainty, and trying to stay grounded while everything around them was unstable. Danny was still searching for his breakthrough, and Rhea was building her own path, but their bond became part of the foundation beneath everything that came later. Then Danny's career finally began to turn. In 1975, he appeared in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest as Martini. The role was not huge in screen time, but the film became a landmark. It won major awards, became one of the most respected films of its era, and placed Danny inside a project that carried real weight. For many actors, a small role can disappear inside a big movie. But Danny did not disappear. He had that strange ability to make even a small moment feel unforgettable. But his real breakthrough was still ahead. In 1978, Danny auditioned for Taxi, and that decision changed his life. The character was Louis De Palma, a dispatcher with a nasty attitude, a sharp tongue, and almost no desire to be liked. On paper, Louis could have been a one-note villain. In Danny's hands, he became one of television's most memorable characters. He was rude, selfish, bitter, and somehow impossible to look away from. Danny gave Louis something dangerous, humanity hiding under cruelty. And that is when Hollywood finally started paying attention. Taxi turned Danny DeVito into a star. He won major recognition, including an Emmy and a Golden Globe, and suddenly the industry that once did not know what to do with him understood that his difference was not a weakness. It was the reason people remembered him. He had not reshaped himself for Hollywood. Hollywood had been forced to make room for him. But while Danny was rising, Rhea was rising too. Rhea Perlman became a television legend in her own, right through Cheers, where she played Carla Tortelli, the sharp, fearless barmaid who could destroy someone with one sentence. She was not just Danny DeVito's partner. She was a powerhouse. She won multiple Emmy Awards and built a career that stood on its own. Together, Danny and Rhea became one of Hollywood's most interesting couples, not because they looked perfect, but because they felt real. But behind every public success, there is always a private cost. In January 1982, after more than a decade together, Danny and Rhea got married. By then, their bond had already lasted longer than many Hollywood marriages. They went on to have 3 children, Lucy, Grace, and Jacob. On the outside, it looked like a rare Hollywood success story: 2 talented actors, 3 children, major careers, and a marriage that had already survived the hardest early years. But success brings pressure. Work brings distance. Fame brings noise. And even strong love can be tested by time. And this is where the story becomes more complicated. Danny's career exploded beyond television. He became a film actor, director, and producer. He appeared in movies like Romancing the Stone, Twins, Batman Returns, Matilda, and many more. He played characters that were strange, loud, dark, funny, and unforgettable. In Batman Returns, his penguin was grotesque, tragic, and terrifying. In Matilda, he played a cruel father while directing a film that would become beloved for generations. He understood darkness, but he also understood heart. But the most powerful part of Matilda was not only what audiences saw on screen. During the making of Matilda, Young actress Mara Wilson was going through a heartbreaking time because of her mother's illness. Over the years, Mara has spoken warmly about Danny and Rhea's kindness during that period. They were not just co-stars in that moment. They became a kind of shelter. And that detail matters because it shows something deeper about Danny DeVito. The man who could play monsters on screen was, in private moments, capable of enormous gentleness. But even kind people can live through painful chapters. As Danny and Rhea's careers continued, their lives became more complicated. They were parents, partners, performers, and working artists inside an industry that does not slow down for anyone. Many fans saw them as proof that real love could survive Hollywood. They were funny, grounded, and different from the glamorous couples who seemed built for magazine covers. Danny and Rhea felt like people who had chosen each other before fame and kept choosing each other after it. Then, after decades together, the news came that shocked fans. In 2012, Danny DeVito and Rhea Perlman separated after 30 years of marriage and more than 40 years together. For fans, it felt like more than a celebrity breakup. It felt like one of Hollywood's rare, real love stories had cracked. People had watched them for years and believed they were different. And maybe they were different because what happened next was not a typical Hollywood ending. They did not turn the separation into a public war. They did not make their pain into a spectacle. They did not rush into a final, bitter ending. They separated, but the bond did not disappear. Reports said they reconciled for a time and later separated again. But even after the relationship changed, they remained legally married. Rhea Perlman has publicly said that divorce did not feel necessary for them. She explained that after so much history and love, they did not want to ruin what still worked with the painful process of divorce. And this is what made their story so unusual. Most people think love has only one shape. Either a couple lives together or the love is over. Either the marriage looks normal or it has failed. But Danny and Rhea's story does not fit neatly into those boxes. They live separately. They have had painful chapters. They are not pretending everything is perfect. But they still remain close. They still share family. They still show up for each other. And in a world obsessed with clean endings, their story is strangely honest. But fame never stopped testing him. But behind the comedy, there was always something serious. Danny's life carries a quiet message. Survival does not always look heroic from the outside. Sometimes it looks like showing up to another audition after being rejected. Sometimes it looks like refusing to change your face, your body, or your voice to make other people comfortable. Sometimes it looks like building a family while working in an industry that constantly pulls people apart. And sometimes it looks like loving someone in a way the world does not fully understand. Comment below what you think about Danny DeVito and Rhea Perlman's story. And if you want more emotional Hollywood stories like this, subscribe and watch the next video.